Greenhaven Prison is located in central Dutchess County in upstate New York. The walls that surround the institution are massive, over 30 feet high and 20 feet thick in some places. Stern-faced guards armed with machine guns are perched inside the turrets that circle the complex. In May 1981, Greenhaven housed nearly 1,700 inmates, of which approximately 1,000 were convicted of murder-related charges. Some of the very worst criminals in the state were held at Greenhaven. This was a maximum security facility, and the prison guards were very aware of the dangers of their job. Any type of rebellion by the inmates would surely end in bloodshed because most prisoners were accustomed to violence and had nothing to lose. It was up to the 540 correction officers to watch over and control a potentially hostile inmate population. The bloody 1971 Attica riot, during which dozens of inmates and guards were killed, was still fresh on the minds of everyone who worked in a penal institution in New York. Correction Officer Donna Payant, 31, was scheduled to work the 1 p.m. to 9 p.m. shift on May 15th. She was a recent transfer out of upstate Clinton Prison and had worked at Greenhaven for only 1 month. Officer Payant punched her time card at 12:08 p.m. and then proceeded to line up. After the morning roll call, which was held at 12:45 p.m., Payant strolled over to the officers' mess where she purchased a Coke. Her assigned detail that afternoon was to patrol the area of the prison yard known as AB. At approximately 12:55 p.m., Payant was walking through one of the prison corridors with CO Claude King and CO Barbara Hinson. A nearby phone rang and was picked up by Hinson. She told Payant that the call was for her as Hinson handed her the phone receiver. Later, CO King would say of Donna Payant that she was crouched over like she was trying to hear. "Hello," Payant said. She appeared to listen to the caller intently. In a few seconds, she replied. "Who? What? Yes, okay," she said and hung up. Payant then told Officer King that there was some sort of foul-up and she needed to get it straightened out. She'd return in a few minutes, she said, and walked off in the direction of the chaplain's office, located off the hospital corridor in back of one of the mess halls. Several minutes later, an inmate named Teddy Goodman lingered in a small alcove opposite the chaplain's office. Goodman had been at Greenhaven since 1977, when he was convicted of murdering his business partner in the Bronx. He watched as Payant approached the office. She had, like, strawberry blonde hair, he said months later. She was carrying a large cup of soda and her uniform jacket folded over her arm. Accompanying her was another inmate, a tall black man with striking blue eyes, whose name Goodman did not know. A few weeks before, Goodman watched this same man place a large metal drum outside the chapel door. The man cleaned out the metal container and then applied a fresh coat of paint. He left the drum by the door to be used as a trash collector. Since then, Goodman had seen the man empty the drum several times as part of his normal chores. When Payant and the inmate reached the end of the corridor, the black man held the door open for her and they walked inside without incident. Goodman loitered around the area for a while longer, smoking cigarettes and shooting the breeze with other prisoners. When he returned to the chapel entrance later at about 2:45 p.m. to dump some trash, Goodman noticed that the trash container was gone. At 6 p.m., a roll call was held in the turnout room for new assignments and the change of shift for some corrections officers. Donna Payant was due to report for her next assignment along with other guards who were scheduled to go off duty. She never showed up. Prison officials were immediately identified of CO Donna Payant's failure to report for her roll call at 6 p.m. Initially, guards telephoned around the prison in an attempt to locate her. It was thought that because she was new to Greenhaven, she might have gotten sidetracked for some unknown reason. But within minutes, supervisors realized something was wrong. They discovered that Payant never reported to any of her afternoon assignments. Failure to respond to an assignment in a prison is a serious matter. A physical search was undertaken as every available corrections officer scoured the huge facility to look for the missing officer. By 8 p.m., no trace of her had been found. The warden ordered an instant lockdown, a situation where every prisoner is locked inside his cell until further notice. Throughout a tense evening, the search continued. Shortly after 12 a.m., a special 200-man search team arrived at the facility to assist prison guards. Trained bloodhounds were brought in to track the scent of Donna Payant. The dogs proceeded down the east and west corridors and into the A and D blocks. They were led into the hospital area but showed no conclusive reactions. The dogs were not taken to the chapel area. In the prison yard, 2 giant dumpsters sat outside the mess hall. These containers were used to dump some of the garbage generated by the facility. 2 officers actually climbed into the metal bins and crawled through the stinking refuse without finding anything. Lights remained on for the entire night as hundreds of state police, guards, and prison staff searched every inch of Greenhaven for the missing correction officer. It seemed impossible, but she was nowhere to be found. There was even some speculation that she had left the prison completely without being seen, but officials quickly discounted that possibility when every gatekeeper was located and interviewed. There was simply no way for an officer to walk out of the prison without being noticed. Guards began to conduct a search of each cell block and then each individual cell. The mess halls were turned upside down and the industry buildings were searched from the roofs to the basements. In the early morning hours of Saturday, May 16th, a garbage truck was called in to empty the dumpsters. As the contents of the bins were dumped into the truck, officers stood by with flashlights and watched as the trash went into the back of the truck. They saw nothing suspicious. Each of the dumpsters was emptied and compacted. When the vehicle was full, it was allowed to leave the Greenhaven facility. From there, the trash was taken to the standard dumping ground near the town of Amenia, some 20 miles away from the prison. 2 corrections officers accompanied the garbage truck, driven by Peter Cooper, a civilian employee, to the dump site. When the truck emptied the load, the trash was spread out on the ground and searched once again. At about 10:30 a.m., the dozer operator noticed a human leg sticking out from a green plastic bag. Cooper walked over to the spot. "I saw about an inch of stomach," he later testified, and let go of the bag. That was it. When the officers investigated, they found Donna Payant's body wrapped inside 3 plastic bags. Her hands were tied around her back. Her uniform was ripped and there was a dark-colored cord wrapped tightly around her neck. She had severe cutting injuries on her nose, lips, and eyelids. Her nipples appeared to have been either cut or bitten off, and there were some strange bruises on her cheek and neck. The killing of Donna Payant reverberated throughout the entire penal system of New York and beyond. On May 18th, more than 5,000 officers from all over the United States attended her funeral in the village of Dannemora. Governor Hugh Carey said in an official statement out of Albany that Mrs. Payant's murder resulted from an act of unconscionable violence which will be met with a swift response. Donna Collins was raised in Dannemora in upstate New York. Her father, Edwin J. Collins, was a corrections officer and had worked in the notorious Clinton prison for over 28 years. After Donna married Leo Payant, also a corrections officer at Clinton, she became a homemaker and later had 3 children. However, the economic demands of a large family were high, and as a result, Donna was forced to take on a series of low-paying jobs to make more money. But finally, she decided to become a corrections officer. She once asked her husband, "Why should I work for $7,000 or $8,000 when I can double that?" She entered the academy located in Albany in late 1980, one of a class of 634 officers. Partly as a result of the Attica prison riot of 1971, New York was in dire need of corrections officers. Donna was an attractive woman with light blonde hair and a pleasant, engaging smile. She was 5'5" with a very slim build, but she was confident in her job and looked forward to a career in corrections. She was commuting periodically from Greenhaven to her home in Dannemora, a lengthy trip of several hundred miles. She expressed hope that, in time, she could obtain a transfer to an institution closer to home. Although all the prisoners at Greenhaven were male, there were over 50 female officers at the facility. She made friends quickly and even socialized with other employees after hours, a fact that would later be brought up in court to her detriment. The investigation into the murder of America's first female corrections officer murdered inside a prison was led by New York State Police Captain Francis DeFrancesco, head of the Bureau of Criminal Investigation. He was assigned to the case during the early morning hours of May 16th while the search for Payant was still in progress. "There are 1,000 suspects," he told the press. "Half of the population, or at least a good percentage, has a manslaughter charge against them." In effect, Donna Payant worked in a place where most residents were convicted killers. Almost anyone in Green Haven had the potential to commit the crime. The last-minute phone call that took Payant away from her duties was also very suspicious. Could an inmate have called her to lure her to a private area of the facility in order to kill her? Any individual who has any information, Captain DeFrancesco later told the court, or we thought could supply any information concerning Donna Payant's whereabouts or the death, was interviewed. The process of segregating the inmates and determining the movements of each individual on May 15th had begun. It was a formidable undertaking and required a joint effort between the Green Haven staff and the state police investigators. Our first priority, said Captain DeFrancesco, was to interview anyone who was to leave the facility, parole or finish sentence, in the event that they could provide any information. But in the meantime, Payant's body required more study. Payant suffered multiple injuries, and it was unclear if those wounds were the result of the attack or caused by the bulldozer sorting out the garbage in the Amenia dump site. It was decided that another autopsy should be performed by a different medical examiner. Dr. Michael Baden, then a deputy medical examiner for the city of New York, was called in. He performed the second autopsy on Payant on May 19th and discovered several additional facts about her injuries. The cause of death was strangulation, achieved by a Venetian blinds cord that was found tightly wrapped around the victim's neck. Payant had wounds to her skull, though not fatal, that would have rendered her unconscious. Injuries to the rectal area indicated an assault with a blunt object, possibly a wooden mop handle. Dr. Baden also concluded that the victim's nipples had been partially amputated by human bites. Although Payant had post-mortem lesions that were most likely inflicted by the bulldozer, she also had several bite marks on her breast and face. Furthermore, those bite marks were of sufficient quality that Dr. Baden felt they could be matched with an assailant. It was an extremely important development, since there were no fingerprints found on any of Payant's belongings or her uniform. Her ID card and badge were later discovered hidden in a closet in a distant cell block. They too revealed no latent prints. Hairs were found inside her belt buckle, but could not be matched to any one individual. No immediate suspects and no witnesses to the event were found. Donna Payant, after death, would have to point to her killer. Despite the fact that no witnesses came forward, progress was made in the first few days of the investigation. Detectives soon learned about the phone call that took Donna Payant away from her fellow officers. Speculation was that it could have been another supervisor who made a late change of assignment and notified Payant where she should respond. However, that theory was quickly discarded when every supervisor on duty at the time of the call was identified and questioned. All denied making the call. CO Barbara Hinson told investigators that the voice sounded like a black man, and since the caller was not a corrections officer, it had to have been an inmate. Police began the arduous task of interviewing all the inmates who had any possible contact with the victim. This consisted of over 200 prisoners, most of whom were uncooperative. However, some of the prisoners raised the possibility that Payant was slain by another guard. Rumors generated from within the prison walls said that Payant had been killed because she learned that some of the guards were dealing drugs to the inmate. There was no evidence that the rumor was true, but the theory persisted. "It's a popular rumor," said one investigator to reporters, "but we're looking into it. So far, we have no way to substantiate it." In the meantime, the lockdown continued, raising tensions and putting additional pressure on Green Haven authorities to expedite the case. State correctional officials responded to oversee the management of the prison and to monitor the progress of the criminal investigation. Police were stumped as to how a guard could disappear inside a maximum security facility without anyone being aware of it for several hours. But prison guards knew better. "A facility is like a city," one officer told the Poughkeepsie Journal. "I don't think people realize how busy it is. But during the course of a day, it's like being in the streets of a city. The movement is massive." Green Haven covers 37 acres of ground. It has a dozen cell blocks, a hospital, a church, industry buildings, mess hall, athletic field, numerous basements, corridors, its own school, administrative building, and dozens of offices and storage areas. It would be easy for someone, especially one who's familiar with the layout of the prison, to disappear for a time. Complicating the issue was the appearance in Greenhaven, on the day of the murder, of a rookie corrections officer from the academy in Albany. This cadet, who resembled Payant, was simply visiting the facility as part of her training program, but several inmates and guards confused her with the victim. They told investigators that they saw the female guard, who they assumed was Donna Payant, in the late afternoon hours, therefore placing the time of death much later than it actually occurred. When investigators examined the schedule for garbage pickup, they found that virtually anyone had access to the garbage bins, and there was no set time as to when the trash was dumped. But with the help of the driver and the location of the body, they were able to ascertain that the remains of Payant were in the front of the truck. That meant the body was picked up with the first load of garbage. When detectives looked further, they discovered that the first dumpster contained the refuse from the chaplain's office area of the prison. Corrections officer Martin Rahilly told investigators that on the day of the murder, at around 1:30 p.m., he'd been inside the chaplain's office with an inmate named Alfredo Diaz. Rahilly said that he took Diaz there to make a telephone call to one of Diaz's relatives. While they entered the office, Rahilly noticed that it was in disarray. Papers and desk items were thrown on the floor as if some force had knocked them over, he later told the court. Rahilly had locked the door behind him and then proceeded to make the call. Suddenly, Rahilly heard a loud banging on the office door and someone yelling, "What are you doing here?" When Officer Rahilly opened the door, he saw an inmate standing there with a plastic bag over his arm. He recognized the prisoner as the one who worked in the chapel and permitted the man to enter. As soon as the inmate saw Officer Rahilly, he calmed down and walked to the rear office while Diaz continued to make his phone call. Several minutes later, Rahilly told detectives, the same inmate came out from the rear office carrying a 55-gallon drum of garbage. The man placed the heavy metal container outside the building and never returned. When asked if he knew the inmate, Rahilly said his name was Lemuel Smith. Lemuel Warren Smith was born in the city of Amsterdam in central New York in 1941. Before his birth, his parents had another son, John, who died at the age of 11 months. This issue would be raised later in Lemuel's life when court psychiatrists said this event had a traumatic impact on Smith's psychological development. He was raised by a strict mother who did not tolerate misbehavior and a father who was a minister for a local church. By the time he was 17, Lemuel was 6'4" and played basketball for Amsterdam High. He was considered a local hero for the team, and there was talk of a promising future in sports. But in 1958, the family decided to move to Maryland. Shortly after the move, Lemuel was arrested and later convicted of beating a woman with a lead pipe in a Baltimore dry cleaning store. It was the first of the many serious crimes committed by Lemuel Smith. On Thanksgiving Eve in 1976, Robert Hederman, the owner of a religious store in downtown Albany, and his assistant, Margaret Byron, were found stabbed to death. Both of the victims had their throats cut. A month later, on December 23, 1976, Joan Richburg, 42, was abducted from the Colony Shopping Mall in New York. She was taken to a deserted area of a parking lot where she was sexually assaulted and killed. Her throat had been slit and her body was savagely mutilated. Both of these horrendous crimes remained unsolved for months. In July 1977, a woman named Mary Lee Wilson, 30, was abducted from downtown Schenectady. Smith, who was in custody for the Albany murders, confessed this crime in 1978 to state police and described in detail what he'd done to the victim. After he raped her, he said he took her to a wooded area where he stomped her to death. He said he flung her body into trees and rammed sticks into her mouth and other parts of her body, causing massive internal injuries. He burned her with cigarettes and bit her on the nose and face. Smith also bit the victim's nipples. During an interview with investigators, he later told police that Ms. Wilson was evil and that she was laughing at him. But the bites on Ms. Wilson's body left definite impressions, which were of evidentiary value. Smith was later examined by Dr. Zvi Klopot, a court-appointed psychiatrist who testified at the Hederman-Byron murder trial. He said that Smith had a conflict in his mind that focused upon his dead brother, John. Klopot said that Smith believed John was a messenger from the devil, and whenever Smith committed a rape or murder, he thought John would protect him from punishment. Somehow, Dr. Klopot concluded, this rage was generated from Smith's upbringing and a strong resentment to his mother. Women he attacked are projections of his mother, he told the court in 1978. The rage he feels automatically flows into John because Smith cannot accept the rage as belonging to him. But the prosecution psychiatrist later testified that Smith was a manipulator and played the court system well. He said Smith fabricated mental illness because he knew he would get a lighter sentence. "I've done some terrible things," he later told the court. "Some hideous things. Things I have to face every day in the mirror." Smith was convicted of the Hederman Byron murders and received 2 25-to-life sentences. Schenectady detectives, who were still working on the Wilson case, then requested a forensic odontologist, Dr. Lemuel Levine, to examine the bite marks on the victim's body. Dr. Levine determined that the bite impressions on the victim's body matched the teeth of Lemuel Smith. Based on that evidence, he was indicted for the murder of Ms. Wilson. Smith was also indicted for the Joan Richburg murder in Schenectady, to which he also confessed. But by then, Smith was already serving multiple life prison terms. There was no chance he could be released. As a result, the district attorney decided there would be no benefit to yet another murder conviction of Lemuel Smith. As a result, both indictments were dismissed. But images of the bite injuries on Ms. Wilson's body were preserved. They were the only known samples of Lemuel Smith's bite impression on human skin. Forensic odontology is dentistry applied to criminal investigations. Activities in this field may include identification of a corpse or bite mark comparisons between 2 or more samples. A forensic odontologist is a dentist who's able to make an expert judgment on such evidence. In many cases, those judgments can determine the guilt or innocence of a defendant. One of the most famous bite mark cases on record occurred in Florida during the 1970s. Serial killer Ted Bundy murdered several college students on the campus of Florida State University in Tallahassee. In addition to being a brutal, sadistic killer, Bundy was a biter. He enjoyed biting his victims both during and after his sexual assaults. One of his victims, Lisa Levy, 20, suffered bite marks on her body, which were of high qualitative value. These wounds were compared to an impression of Bundy's teeth and were shown to be a perfect match. Bundy was found guilty and later executed for his crimes. Of course, bite marks can be pivotal in criminal investigations. The importance of their application usually depends on the quality of the impressions. Generally, the more pronounced the bite mark, the more likely a comparison will be successful. Bite mark comparisons are not, despite television portrayals to the contrary, irrefutable. At times, they can be subjective to individual interpretation due to several factors. Human skin is not the perfect medium for a bite mark impression. It differs from one individual to the next and stretches in unpredictable ways. The red bruising that lies under the skin, subcutaneous, and often present in human bite marks, is frequently misinterpreted as part of the bite mark impression. The position of the biter and the victim, the duration of the bite, and even the manner in which the evidence is photographed can make a difference in the analysis. It takes a trained, experienced eye to understand these variables. One of the forensic odontologists called in by Dr. Michael Baden was none other than Dr. Lemuel Levine, the same man who performed the analysis on the bite mark evidence in the Mary Lee Wilson case in 1977. As soon as Dr. Levine examined the injuries to Donna Payant's chest, he noticed the similarities between the 2 murder victims. He reported his findings to Captain DeFrancesco of the New York State Police. The bite marks on the body of Donna Payant matched the bite marks on the body of Mary Lee Wilson. There could only be one inescapable conclusion. Lemuel Smith had killed both women. The stunning results of Dr. Levine's comparison were powerful evidence against Smith. For prosecutors, it was the final link in the puzzle of Donna Payant's death. On June 1, 1981, Smith was formally arrested and charged with her murder. Because he was already under a life sentence, New York state law dictated that if he was found guilty of murder, Smith would face a mandatory death penalty. C. Vernon Mason, who would later join attorney Alton Maddox and Reverend Al Sharpton of New York City for the Tawana Brawley hoax of 1987, was chosen to defend Smith. At that time, Mason was the general counsel for the National Conference of Black Lawyers. But Mason would not be alone for very long. In the nearby Fishkill Correctional Facility, Abby Hoffman, the political activist from the 1960s, was in custody on an unrelated drug charge. Through conversations with other inmates, Hoffman heard about the Payant murder case. His own interest aroused, Hoffman wrote a letter to his old friend, New York City Attorney William Kunstler. In it, Hoffman said, "It looks like a frame-up bill. You ought to get into this." Apparently, that was enough for Kunstler. "I can say Abby is a pretty good observer of life," he told reporters the next day. In early June 1981, William Kunstler joined the effort to save Lemuel Smith from the electric chair. The strategy for defending Smith was formulated the day William Kunstler took over the defense. Long before 1981, the New York City-born attorney had a reputation of taking on unpopular and controversial causes. Known initially as a civil rights attorney and activist, Kunstler represented the Chicago Seven in the conspiracy trial of 1970 and defended inmates charged in the bloody prison riot at Attica in 1971. So, when he accepted the Smith case, it seemed natural to plant the seed of official misconduct as early as possible. In his very first press interview, Kunstler outlined his thoughts on the case. "With a white woman, a black inmate," he mused, "there's enough smoke around that anyone with a sensitive nose like mine would do something about it." He pointed out that in a case like this one, there was a tremendous amount of pressure to get a conviction. "Smith is terribly vulnerable," he told reporters. "If you want to pick a victim, that's precisely the kind you want. Someone no one cares about." Mrs. Mildred Smith, Lemuel's mother from Schenectady, echoed those beliefs. "I wanted these lawyers because I feel he was framed," she said to reporters from the Poughkeepsie Journal. "My son is black," she continued, "and naturally, we're always discriminated against." But there was more. Kunstler raised the specter of official corruption. He hinted that perhaps the situation was not as simple as authorities would have the public believe. During the investigation of the murder, guards at Greenhaven were transferred to other institutions without explanation. Furthermore, there were persistent rumors of an ongoing inquiry into drug dealing by prison guards at Greenhaven. It was therefore feasible, Kunstler said, that guards were involved in killing one of their own. This supposedly happened at 1 p.m. in broad daylight, Mason pointed out to the press. How could this have been done? But no action of the defense team raised such fury as when Kunstler announced that the victim's reputation was fair game in a courtroom. Donna Payant's background would have to be examined to see what role it played in her death. There were already rumors of Payant's infidelity at the prison, and Kunstler was ready to exploit those issues. "We don't say these things are true," he later told the judge. "We don't want to embarrass her husband or Mrs. Payant's memory. However, we have a client who's facing the death penalty. The victim would have to be dragged through the mud to help save her killer." In the meantime, Smith was transferred out of Greenhaven and shipped over to the Fishkill facility, a distance of about 20 miles. On the morning of June 10th, he was brought to Dutchess County Court for a court appearance. When he was asked who he wanted for an attorney, he claimed ignorance. "I don't understand what's happening," he told the court. "I haven't seen an attorney yet." That was because, at that very moment, Kunstler and Mason were holding a press conference outside Fishkill Prison. "There is no probable cause," Kunstler breathlessly told reporters in front of the barbed wire gates about his new client. "He is, in essence, a scapegoat." In June 1981, the defense team was made aware of the evidence against their client. Not only were there witnesses who could place Lemuel Smith with the victim at the scene of the murder, but the bite evidence was extremely damaging. Something had to be done to either discredit that testimony or get other experts to challenge the results of the comparison made by the prosecution side. Kunstler and Mason decided to obtain the services of another forensic odontologist. In early July, the defense asked Dr. Neil Reisner to take a look at the bite evidence. Dr. Neil Reisner, currently the chief of forensic dentistry for Westchester County Medical Examiner's Office, was a consultant for the New York City Medical Examiner's Office at that time and a diplomat in the American Board of Forensic Odontology. "When they asked me to examine the bite marks in both cases," he said in a recent interview, "I knew the results would be critical." On July 2, 1981, the defense supplied Dr. Reisner with a mold of Lemuel Smith's teeth and several photographs, including those from the Mary Lee Wilson murder. I took it all home with me that very night, he recalled, and within a few hours, I came to a conclusion. It was really not too difficult. The bite mark on Donna Payant's body belonged to Lemuel Smith. Dr. Reisner said he then called the defense team and spoke with C. Vernon Mason. I told him my findings, but I don't think that's what he wanted to hear, he said. Mason asked Dr. Reisner if it made a difference that Smith had lost a tooth since the Wilson murder. Not in this case, Dr. Reisner replied. In this bite mark, the impression is only of the lower set of teeth, which is sometimes the case, he explained recently. Many bite marks consist of upper and lower, but some do not. It depends on a lot of things: motion of the biter, the victim, movement during the bite, and other factors, he said. I know that might not have helped the defense, but that was the truth, he said. It wasn't the result they wanted, but they have to realize that forensic experts are going to give the same opinion no matter who hires them, Dr. Reisner explained. Since the Payant case, he's testified in dozens of criminal cases, both for the prosecution and the defense. Ever since the day I told them that it was their client's bite, Dr. Reisner said, I never heard from Kunstler or Mason again, and they never paid me for my services either. During 1982, attorneys Kunstler and Mason prepared their case while Smith remained incarcerated in Downstate Correctional Institution at Fishkill. There, he sent letters to various county and state officials complaining about everything from the quality of the food, racial discrimination, and abuse from prison staff. In an indexed 70-page letter to County Court Judge Raymond E. Aldrich, complete with chapter divisions, page numbers, and drawings, Smith said that his life was in danger. There's a saying in legal terms, if a man carries a deadly weapon, he is a potential murderer. It's quite apparent that corrections personnel do carry deadly clubs, Smith wrote, and Mr. Roja, a prisoner who had recently committed suicide, and Donna Payant erase all doubt about corrections personnel being potential murderers. He mused that no county judge who was sympathetic to his situation could ever be re-elected, and that Department of Corrections, affiliated agencies, their friends and associates have adjudged me guilty before trial and have become part of the Department of Corrections' plan to harass me, to persecute me, to mentally and physically abuse me, and eventually take my life by any means at their disposal. Smith was also aware of the controversial aspect of the death penalty law in the state of New York and the importance of the Payant case. He described her as the only female corrections officer who had been murdered while allegedly on duty inside of a maximum security correctional facility. He wrote, "It's a known fact the death penalty laws cannot be tested unless I'm found guilty, and many politicians have already taken positions in the upcoming debate, and the only holdup is a guilty verdict in Dutchess County Court." Smith said that a guilty verdict was a foregone conclusion and blamed a hostile population for his expected fate. This was because the juries to be selected from Dutchess County, where a large segment of the population is Department of Corrections personnel and those affiliated with Department of Corrections. Despite his claims to innocence, however, Smith was not exactly an ordinary American citizen. In prison for most of his adult life and convicted of 2 vicious murders in 1977, he had confessed to killing at least 5 people, according to police investigators. There may have been even more. All of a sudden, one night, after taking my girlfriend to the movies, Smith told the judge, I killed my best friend's mother. Believe me, I'm not a nice guy. For the next several months, Kunstler and Mason introduced a series of motions to the court involving issues such as trial venue, applications for case dismissal, witness credibility, special prosecutor, and various conspiracy theories that usually involved prison guards murdering Payant to keep her quiet about renegade correction officers. The court had to deal with each motion, which sometimes required weeks of review. But by the end of 1982, the defense had run out of ideas, and the trial was finally scheduled for January 1983. The trial of Lemuel Smith opened in Dutchess County Court in Poughkeepsie on January 20th, 1983. The special prosecutor, William Stanton, had studied the evidence in the case and was ready for the contentious atmosphere of a William Kunstler defense. The DA's office knew that Payant's reputation, the conduct of the guards at the facility, and the state's investigation into Greenhaven would be the issues to be explored. However, prosecutors were sure that Lemuel Smith was the man who murdered Officer Payant. "I will stand before you at the end of the trial," Stanton told jurors, "and have no hesitancy in asking you to find Lemuel Smith guilty." Beginning with the testimony of guards to describe the procedures at Greenhaven, Stanton outlined the situation at the prison at the time Donna Payant arrived in April 1981. Witnesses told the court that the prison resembled a miniature city that contained its own hospital, supplies, schools, and support staff. They said it would be very possible for an unattended inmate to walk through the prison corridors pushing trash cans or emptying containers into dumpsters. The officers who were with Donna when she received the mysterious phone call also testified. She said there was some sort of mix-up, CO Claude King told the jury. She'd get it straightened out and probably be back in a minute. Prosecutors also put an inmate on the witness stand who said he heard the defendant make an incriminating admission. Robert DiBona, serving a 20-year sentence for a series of armed robberies in Long Island, was incarcerated at Fishkill Correctional Facility in May 1981 when he had a conversation with Lemuel Smith. He was in an emotional, tense state, DiBona said to the hushed courtroom. He said it had been on his mind for a long time, that he was driven and couldn't keep himself from doing it, that he should never have made the phone call and deserved to die. Kunstler tried to discredit DiBona by showing that he just wanted better treatment in exchange for his testimony. But DiBona denied it. The statements pertained to acts so disgusting and so low, I didn't feel I could live with myself, he said in explaining why he decided to testify. Terry Goodman, the inmate who lingered in the alcove outside the chaplain's office on the day of the murder, also testified. When Stanton showed him a photo of Donna Payant, Goodman had no trouble with the identification. "This is the woman I told you I saw go into the chaplain's office with Smith," he said. It was damaging testimony, and the defense knew it. Kunstler later said that Goodman was a very smart cookie. He got the best deal I've ever seen offered to anyone. Following Goodman to the stand was C.O. Rahilly, who, since the murder, had problems of his own. Granted immunity from prosecution, Rahilly testified about his own substance abuse over the years and narcotic sales within the prison walls. "I did bring in a quantity of drugs for which I expected to be repaid," he said. Rahilly also admitted to selling drugs outside the prison for years. Kunstler told reporters later that he had never seen a drug dealer of such proportions. But Goodman was clear about his memory of the day of Payant's murder. He said that he was inside the chaplain's office when he heard a banging on the door. When he opened the door, he saw Lemuel Smith standing in the doorway with a plastic bag under his arm. Smith walked past him and into the rear office. Several minutes later, Smith emerged carrying a large metal drum. "I heard it hit the floor with a thud when he was out of my view," Rahilly said. After a month of testimony that slowly pieced together the puzzle of how Donna Payant could have been attacked and killed within Greenhaven's walls, the stage was set for the most important and damning testimony of all. Up until the forensic odontologists appeared on the witness stand, defense attorneys realized that there was no direct link between their client and the murder of Correction Officer Payant. Witnesses had placed Smith and the victim together just before the crime occurred, but the actual time of the murder was still not firmly established. Additionally, no fingerprints were recovered at the crime scene, which was thought to be the rear of the chaplain's office. Prosecutors knew that the bite mark evidence was the most crucial portion of their case. Mary Lee Wilson, the woman so brutally slaughtered in the city of Schenectady in 1977, was about to have justice done. Bite marks that she suffered during her savage assault were ruled admissible in the Smith trial, despite defense efforts to have them excluded. The source of these bite marks was not in dispute, since they had already been examined and determined to be from the teeth of Lemuel Smith, and Smith had once confessed to the Wilson murder, thereby offering even further proof that those bite marks, in fact, belonged to him. Dr. Lowell Levine, the forensic odontologist who had once worked on the Wilson case, was called to the stand and gave the results of his comparison analysis between the bite marks found on Payant's breast and the Wilson injuries. "Did you make a scientific comparison between the bite marks on the Mary Lee Wilson case and the bite mark that you found on the Donna Payant photography?" asked the prosecutor. "Yes, sir," Dr. Levine replied. "It's my opinion that the two bite marks were made by the same set of teeth." Although Kunstler tried to raise doubts about Dr. Levine's conclusion, he was unyielding. It was Smith's bite. Of that, he was sure. On April 7, 1983, prosecutors called Dr. Neil Reisner to the stand. Although I was hired originally by the defense, he said in an interview recently, they had no idea that I might be testifying. You should have seen the look on Mr. Kunstler's face when he saw me. However, after a lengthy in-chambers discussion about the limitations of Dr. Reisner's testimony, it was decided that he could not mention his previous involvement with the defense team. He was asked if he had examined the 2 photographs of bite marks in the case, and did he arrive at an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical dental certainty. Yes, I did, Dr. Reisner replied. They were both caused by the same. They were the same in origin with a reasonable certainty. By the time the case went to the jury, they were offered only 2 choices: acquit or find the defendant guilty of first-degree murder, a capital offense. Attorneys on both sides were in argument on that point. Lem wants to go all or nothing at all, Kunstler told the press. During his summation, the 62-year-old attorney appealed to the jury's sense of responsibility in a death penalty case. For once in your life, you have the power of life and death in your hands, he said to the 6-man, 6-woman jury. Legally, that power is bestowed on very few. You have it. Use it wisely so that you can walk away from this with your heads held high. Kunstler also challenged the prosecution version of events on the day of the murder. There were still so many questions about the case, he said. Consider the total implausibility of the crime taking place the way the prosecution said it did, he said. And again, the specter of a conspiracy among correction officers was raised by the defense. Kunstler said it was possible that guards killed Payant because she had knowledge of drug activity at Greenhaven, or because of her romantic involvement with other corrections officers. Prosecutor Stanton, however, stuck to the proven issues in his summation. He said conspiracy theories were offered by the defense because it was the only evidence they had. They just threw these things out, hoping 1 or 2 of you would latch onto them, he told the jury. There was another witness in this case, Stanton said. Donna Payant. She came into the courtroom the only way she could, through photographs taken at her autopsy. Stanton referred to the all-important bite mark impressions on the victim's breast. Through it, she's telling us, the defendant is the one who beat me. The defendant is the one who bit me. The defendant is the one who killed me. At the end of the day's proceedings, when Smith was led out of the courtroom, he told reporters, if they got any sense, they'll acquit me. The jury received the case for deliberations on April 17th. For the next 4 days, jurors contemplated the evidence. On the morning of April 21st, a verdict was reached. Smith was found guilty of murder in the first degree and faced a mandatory death sentence. Stanton remarked, I had no doubt from the start that Smith was guilty. After the verdict, Smith attempted to shake the hands of prosecuting attorneys. All declined. He killed this woman. He's killed others, one attorney later told reporters. To shake hands at that point would have been an insult to Donna Payant's memory and what he did to her. Yes, I turned my back. As corrections officers took Smith out in handcuffs, he said to no one in particular, I feel good. I have God's peace. I didn't do anything. Smith, however, was unable or unwilling to explain how his bite mark was found on Donna Payant's body. After the trial, the defense filed several appeals with the state of New York. Most concerned the admissibility of the evidence and statements made by Smith in prior criminal cases. Additional issues presented were the failure of proof beyond a reasonable doubt and the quality of the bite mark evidence. The New York State Court of Appeals dispelled these points by their decision in People v. Smith, 63 NY 2D 41, decided July 2, 1984. The evidence linked defendant to the bite mark on Payant's body. The remaining circumstantial evidence established that defendant had both the opportunity and access to the materials for killing Payant and disposing of her body. We therefore conclude that the evidence was of such weight and credibility as to convince us that the jury was justified in finding defendant guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. The conspiracy theories offered by the defense were also addressed by the appeals court and rejected. The theory posited by the defense, both at trial and on appeal, is that Payant was murdered as part of a conspiracy among unknown correction officers who lured her to the East Side corridor area of the institution by a telephone call, murdered in the H block or industry area, and placed her body in the Greenhaven dump truck while it was temporarily abandoned. This theory, which the defendant concedes is bizarre, takes Payant far from her assigned area and means that both Payant's murder and the hiding and disposal of her body occurred in relatively open areas to which many people had access. This would have required a truly substantial conspiracy, which has no basis in the proof at the trial. However, the appeal was not a total failure for the defense team. The court did rule in the defendant's favor on one point, maybe the most important issue of all. In 1983, a conviction in New York of first-degree murder required a mandatory death sentence. Noting that courts have historically struggled to maintain a system of capital punishment at once consistent and principled, but also humane and sensible to the uniqueness of the individual, from Eddings v. Oklahoma, 455 U.S. 104-110, the court felt that current New York state law did not follow those guidelines because it did not allow consideration of any mitigating factors in a death penalty case. Thus, under the standards established by the Supreme Court, wrote Judge Kaye of the State Appeals Court, any death penalty statute which did not provide for consideration by the sentencer of all relevant individual circumstances would be incompatible with the commands of the 8th and 14th Amendments. Simply put, the court rejected New York state law as unconstitutional, and as a result, Lemuel Warren Smith avoided his date with the electric chair. He was later resentenced to an additional life term. By declaring the death penalty statute unconstitutional, as it applies to lifers in prison, the court placed prison staff in a very uncomfortable position. Many corrections officers were vociferous in their opposition to this controversial ruling. If a lifer inmate wanted to kill a guard, what penalty could he suffer? What would be the deterrent? He was already doing life and had nothing to lose. At his sentencing hearing on June 10, 1983, Lemuel Smith put his feelings on record. "I got so much time, they can't do nothing to me," he said. "Think about it. If I wanted some sex, I could rape, I could sodomize. They can't do nothing to me."